1, 2, 3, 4.
Hola a todos. Me llamo Andrew Atkinson, lo siento, soy un ingeniero de software para LivingSocial en Washington, D.C., en los Estados Unidos. LivingSocial es una empresa de comercio electrónico que conecta personas con negocios locales pequeños. LivingSocial ofrece descuentos para restaurantes, servicios, viajes y más. Hace 2 años, cuando empecé en LivingSocial, había 10 ingenieros y ahora somos 100. Actualmente soy parte del equipo de ingenieros que llamamos Consumer Web, que tiene un enfoque en los problemas de los consumidores. Mi trabajo específicamente es hacer crecer y mantener el producto que llamamos Escapes, que son nuestros descuentos de viajes. A causa de este crecimiento rápido, nuestra mayor inquietud es no olvidarnos de nuestro enfoque en los problemas de los consumidores. Mi charla ofrece algunas estrategias para mantener este enfoque. Queremos aprender rápido y a bajo costo desde el comportamiento de los consumidores si nuestras soluciones son suficientes. Nuestro equipo usa Ruby y sigue creciendo. Si están interesados en ser parte de nuestro equipo, déjenme saber. Estoy muy feliz de estar aquí. Muchas gracias. All right, I wanted to give a little bit of a background on my Rails projects. A few years ago, I worked. This background helped shape why I wanted to talk about this today. A few years ago, I worked on a project where we had a really interesting team, had a great design. It was a product for businesses, and we had a pretty fast iteration speed. It was a lot of fun to work on and a great team. We had one problem, though. We didn't have very many users. So when we were talking about building features, we didn't have a great way to validate whether those features were useful since we didn't have a lot of user data to look at. Later, I worked at a company where we built a really interesting solution technically, worked on it for many months, used a lot of modern technology. We had a node server using WebSockets, passing messages back and forth. We worked on it for many months at a company that already had an established product, and we were trying to enter a new market. And we actually never shipped the product at all. In retrospect, having learned more about lean startup and some of these concepts about developing users through user acquisition and customer development and that sort of thing, I think it would have made a lot more sense to dedicate more resources to focusing on that portion of the problem. So those are some of the projects I've worked on that helped me choose to give a talk on this. And I'm wondering if anybody here has worked on projects like that where maybe you expected a large amount of users and what you had actually was a small amount of users, or maybe even worse, your product didn't ship at all. And you had this many users, zero. When I joined LivingSocial about 2 years ago, it was already fairly successful. The company had shifted a little bit into selling discount selling daily deals from offering that they had done prior to that when they had some success early on just in one city with one deal, one merchant. And they realized it was a successful business model, and they really wanted to focus and grow that as quickly as possible. So I was really attracted to the fast speed of the company, the fact that they used Ruby, and they had a great focus on projects that really mattered to customers. So I've been working for LivingSocial for a couple of years in the Washington, D.C. headquarters. We've got offices all around the United States. We've got developers outside of the United States. On the side, I do some iOS projects for public transportation in the Twin Cities as well, which lets me do some more product development, which is a lot of fun. LivingSocial is the local marketplace to buy and share the best things to do in your city. We also have partnered with Let's Bonus, which is a Spanish company that operates in much of Latin America, including Argentina. I don't know if anyone here knows Let's Bonus or not. So I work on the, as the team has grown, we've specialized. That's how we've been able to iterate more quickly within certain areas. And so I've joined the consumer web team. And consumer web encompasses daily deals, escapes, which are our travel deals, adventures, which are prepackaged tours, shop, which are physical products, and then takeout and delivery, where we offer an online food ordering solution to restaurants. So like I mentioned, I've joined the escapes team specifically. So for the rest of the talk, what I'd like to do is go through some projects I've worked on at LivingSocial and talk about some strategies for kind of staying lean as a team and focusing on customer problems. So about 6 months ago, the escapes travel deals were about 1 year old at the time for the business. It became the #2 revenue contributor to the business, so it was very important to the business. But we had built it on the same daily deals kind of schema, model, back-end tools. We productionalized it in the same way with our operations team and our salespeople and that sort of thing. So the company said, well, we want to grow the escapes business. Let's put a team on it. And so I was the first engineer to start working on that. And since then, we've added a product manager, a couple of more engineers. We have a team of designers as well. So we have a large backlog of ideas, and we don't really have a challenge coming up with things to work on, whether it be optimization tests or new product development. What our primary challenge is selecting good things to work on and making sure that they're going to resonate with consumers, and ultimately, as an e-commerce company, we're going to be able to sell things. So let's jump into a specific example. What this page shows is an experiment. It's a screenshot from an experiment where we have our index page of escapes deals. And the experiment was, let's show prices on the page, which you can see here in orange. And by showing prices, people that are shopping for a specific price point, let's say I'm looking for a weekend trip for $100, they're going to be able to find the deals more easily, and we'll be able to sell more travel deals. So that was the experiment. So we ran a test. We used Vanity, which is a Ruby gem that uses Redis to track participations and conversion on a metric. So our metric for this test was purchases of escapes deals. And what this test shows, these red boxes, this one on the left shows the two alternatives. One was no price, which was our current treatment at the time we ran this experiment, and then the experiment portion was showing the price. And we can see that no price actually converted better, which was surprising to our team. And we've actually seen this recur. When we add things to the page, whether it be an index page with a bunch of things, or a specific deal page, which would be like a Rails show action, it tends to actually reduce conversion because our theory is it's typically more distracting. So we try to keep pages as clean and simple as possible. And this test really demonstrated the importance of validating hypotheses. It's not really good enough at the company to say, let's add the prices to the page, we'll sell more deals. What is good enough is let's test that let's consider that an untested hypothesis, and let's test it and let's show whether or not it really does sell more deals or not. The other thing to note is Vanity will do a p-value calculation, so we know that these results are statistically significant. These are a couple of lean startup books. Even before I joined LivingSocial, they were using some lean startup strategies. And I found these books helpful to build my vocabulary and experience with these methodologies and to help describe them to my team members. Lean startup has this idea of the build, measure, learn loop. So I think this is interesting for engineers to think about. Instead of really defining your value as shipping features and shipping code, shipping products, what we really want to do is shift our emphasis towards validated learning by shipping code and features and products, but then measuring whether or not customers are using them, taking a look at customers' behavior. So Lean Startup advocates for moving through this loop as quickly as possible so that we can minimize wasted effort. Lean Startup has let us, as a large team, try a lot of different concepts, which works out well. We have several A/B tests running every week. And it's allowed us to preserve a focus on customers, essentially validated learning, but customer behavior being how we define a successful project. This is a little visualization of our team growth. Going from 10 engineers to 100 engineers has been a challenge at times. We have a lot of different styles. We use a lot of different technologies. We're no longer just solely a Ruby shop. We use Java and Scala as well. There's some Clojure projects. What we found, though, is that at least on the consumer web team, which is around 30 to 40 engineers, that A/B testing, small iterations, breaking up big scope into small projects, it still works, whether you're 1 or 2 engineers or you're 30 engineers. One of the techniques we use to get things out the door is a slow rollout. When you sign up for LivingSocial, you're asked to choose a city that's near you. And so each of our users in the database are associated to a city. So often what we'll do is try out a feature just on one city. What that lets us do is get some actual data as to whether or not that feature will be useful for people. And then it also allows us to avoid potential performance issues and really defer building in a lot of caching and that sort of thing as caching adds complexity to the code, and we don't want to necessarily introduce that right away. Another thing we do is to reduce scope for a large project is we'll often move mobile web or native mobile device support out, basically. We'll say, let's establish whether or not this experiment is successful on our desktop web experience, and later let's build in the mobile support for it. So roughly speaking, this isn't an exact representation, but our engineering process is to build it, make it pretty, which involves building out the design and the user experience, and then ship it and try to think about ideas in terms of let's get this out quickly, which might, and use some of the tools that are available to you as an engineer, which are slow rollouts, for example. What we don't want to do is worry about scaling or extraction too early. We want to establish that something is useful before we invest further in the code. One of the quotes we like from Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook is, "Move fast and break things. Unless you are breaking stuff, you're not moving fast enough." And this is uncomfortable for some people if they've been at really large companies, but pretty much all of the engineers on the engineering team at LivingSocial have taken the site down briefly at some point. And we pretty much accepted that as a reality, given that we have so many projects happening at the same time and we're moving relatively quickly. We're deploying code many times throughout the day. There's really no process for deploying code. When you finish a feature, you cap deploy. And what we want to try to do, though, is given that that is our environment and that's what we're aiming to do, is make progress quickly, we want to recover quickly when there are errors. So we want to keep commits small, and we want to be able to identify commits easily that are the offending issue and revert, deploy, fix the issue offline. And then when we do break things, engineers will write up a description of what happened, steps to avoid the issue in the future, and then we'll share that with the team. Test ideas cheaply is the idea that, let's say you've got a great feature idea, you're a new engineer at LivingSocial, you think this is going to make us millions of dollars. What about instead first we build just a form for people to sign up that captures the essence of your feature idea, but isn't basically the entire investment of building your feature. So why would we do that? Well, what we want to do is get some idea concretely and with actual user data that your feature would be interesting. And we could do that by measuring the number of impressions of the display of your sign-up form against the number of conversions, which would be a record in the database that says this person is interested in this feature, whatever it might be. Let me give you some examples. One of the first things I worked on was a project called Purchase Feedback. And the idea here was, you've seen this probably at most e-commerce sites. After you buy something, you get the opportunity to say, this was a good deal, I like the merchant, I would go back, I would recommend this to my friends. So we did this project with a really large scope. We also built a merchant backend for this, where we would aggregate all this feedback, show a tag cloud of popular words, show feedback across multiple deals if the merchant had run with us multiple times. But looking at this from a lean startup perspective, we had a couple of big assumptions in there, and I think it's important to think about assumptions in this way. One is that consumers would give us feedback. Would anybody really care? I mean, it's a fairly safe bet, but we didn't have any actual numbers as to what percentage of people would care and click, I want to give feedback. And then second, would merchants find the feedback valuable? And this is interesting because we wanted to build this tool as a way to help bring our merchants back into our tool so we could use it to communicate with them and just sort of keep them in the LivingSocial software. So overall, this project was a success. It launched a couple of years ago, and since then we've collected millions of feedback records, and merchants use it regularly. But in retrospect, what we could have done differently was launched a form and just sent it to select consumers and gathered feedback. We would have had an idea of what kind of rate consumers would use it, and we could have collected the feedback from the consumers, presented it manually, maybe in a PowerPoint presentation or something, to some of our merchants to gauge their level of interest. Our salesperson could have taken it and said, hey, is this something that would be useful to you? Would you use Merchant Center more, which is our merchant tool? So those are some strategies to keep in mind if you find yourself working on a project like this, to help break up the scope and really justify each step of the project. Test small changes that could have a big impact. I'll give you an example of this too. The idea here is big changes that have a big impact, those are great too, but you're going to be making a much more significant investment of time. We have done various phases of optimization where we'll say, okay, we have 1 week, it's a Friday, let's plan something to build next week and deliver by next week that we think will improve purchase conversion or will improve subscription conversion or some kind of metric we want to target. And this is an example of a relatively small project. So we have a couple of design iterations. This is the one that went to the public, but basically for users that are logged in, that have a single credit card associated to their LivingSocial account, they could buy from the deal page instead of clicking from the deal page through the rest of our purchase funnel, which is more steps. This is sort of like Amazon one-click. So the idea was, you may have guessed it, increase purchase conversion. So we wanted to make más dólares. Unfortunately, we never achieved a statistically significant result with this. We were successful in that the idea went from concept to implementation in a week, a relatively small amount of time. But the idea wasn't successful, and given that we had a backlog of other ideas to try, we just killed the feature and I removed the code. For a while I worked on user acquisition, and this is an entire section of the business that's really important where we spend a lot of money on purchasing traffic to drive traffic to LivingSocial to get more subscribers. So in this case, we use something called FacePile, which is part of the Facebook SDK. And for traffic that we knew was originating from Facebook, from an ad click, we had an idea to show the FacePile to those people compared with a different alternative where they didn't see the FacePile. So this is a portion of a landing page. We've done hundreds of landing pages, and we've done them different designs, different content on the page, and that sort of thing, trying to target specifically subscribers. So this is a winner. There's an idea of social proof, which is if you are landing on a page and you want to sign up for something, if you see some of your friends have signed up for it already, you're more likely to sign up for it. And we were able to show in a statistically significant fashion. We ran 100,000 participants of each of the no FacePile and the FacePile version, and the FacePile converted around 5% better, which was 5,000 more subscribers. Something that we talk about too when scope becomes big. Let's say you want to, in this case, I'm going to share an example where we had a project where we wanted to build a notification system. After we collected some data, we said, hey, we could collect that data manually. And by manually, I mean something like logging into MySQL console and dumping results without having to build a system to do that for you. Let me give you an example. I've been working with Escapes now for about 6 months, as I mentioned, and one of the ideas we had when we were doing some optimization and kind of /optimization/ product development feature idea was the idea that some of our deals sell out. So our Escapes deals at this time ran about 10 days. If you visited the page from an email click, say, at day 8, and the deal was sold out, there wouldn't really be anything for you to do. There's no call to action for the consumer. So what we built was this waitlist concept where you could say, I'm interested in this deal. If you get more of them, email me and I'll buy one. So we tested that. Our hypotheses were additional purchases from additional inventory. And then we also thought we'd be able to show our merchants that gave us an allocation of hotel rooms. Let's say they gave us 100 rooms. We'd be able to say, hey, we have 50 more people. Can we get 25 more rooms? And that would put us in a better position if we reran with that merchant in the future. We'd say, last time we did 125 rooms. So this didn't work out. We learned the majority of our deals do not sell out. We knew this already, but doing this as an experiment really clarified it for the whole escapes team. And we learned that we typically had the maximum inventory. Our salespeople were pretty good about staying in communication with the merchant, and if we thought we could sell more, we'd certainly add more to our site to be able to sell. We did get more inventory from actually a handful of merchants, and so what we did was we emailed those we emailed those consumers, and we said, hey, guess what? We have more hotels available for this escapes deal that you said you were interested in. Please come back to our site and buy it. And that conversion was much lower than we thought it was going to be. It was in the single-digit percentage, which was really interesting because people said, I want to buy this deal, but when we emailed them just a few days later, a lot of them did not actually buy the deal. What we didn't do, though, on the success side was we didn't build any kind of automated reporting. We didn't build any kind of merchant notification. This one's really important, I think, is when you're discussing new product development ideas or optimization tests, think about what your assumptions are in there about consumer behavior, about your target customer's behavior, and consider which one is the most risky and try to test that first if possible. Let me give you an example. We worked on a loyalty product. We called it Punch Card. If you ever go to a coffee shop and you get a punch, 2 punch, whatever, you get 10 coffees and then the next one is free. We wanted to build something like that, and we wanted to make it very convenient for consumers by having them use their same credit card. So this had a ton of assumptions in it. Would consumers sign up for this? Would merchants sign up for this? Would integration with a third party where in order to enable this kind of convenience with the credit card, we needed to work with a third party that had credit card financial data from point of sale systems. I put the merchant one in the red box because ultimately this product didn't launch. We worked on it for many weeks. So it was disappointing that it didn't launch. I think it would have been a great product, but what we didn't do in retrospect was really validate that we could sign up merchants, that it would be easy for them. And we realized fairly far into the project that we had a chicken and egg problem where in order for it to be compelling to merchants, they wanted to see a lot of consumer transaction data where they would be coming back in and they would really be loyal customers. And on the consumer side, we didn't really have much to offer to the consumers without having a lot of merchants already signed up in the city. So it was a really tricky project in order to try to validate those assumptions, but I think in retrospect, working on that first would have been a better investment of time. Another note of caution too is working with third-party companies, especially financial companies. They're likely to move much more slowly than a smaller, leaner startup type of company. And after doing many weeks of conference calls, I can say that be cautious about working with really large financial companies. So what we're currently working on is we're trying to build up the escapes product. And in order to do that, what we do now is sell a voucher where if you buy it, you get a few months to call the hotel yourself and set up a booking, but you get a good price. So what we're getting into now is, what if you pick your specific check-in and check-out dates, like a lot of travel websites? You're not going to get as good of a price, but you know when exactly you're traveling, and we know exactly when you're traveling, so we can offer you other things. You'll be able to choose your flights. You can buy prepackaged tours. We're building all new interfaces for this to make it much more comfortable and typical of a travel site compared with selling deals. We're also working on a payment piece for hotels that are paid in a different method. So just a ton of scope here. This is just one screenshot from some of the work. So what are we doing to combat all of the scope? Well, we're starting small. Even though we have a schema and we still have one monolithic Rails application where we've been pulling out various Rails applications and functionality, we're using our existing Rails application and existing schema, even though it's a little awkward to work with, to first establish that there's consumer demand for these deals, since they're not priced as well. We're also building piece by piece. We're just saying we're going to run with this deal because it has air. We're just going to build all of the air stuff. We're not going to do any of the tour stuff, for example. And we're not doing the merchant payment project because that's also another third-party financial company integration. And we know that's going to take a while, so we're waiting until we already have a successful business without that, and then we're going to add that. So let me wrap up here with a few more points. Actually, they're not really new points. I'll repeat points that I think are the most important from the presentation, I guess. Validate riskiest assumptions first. That's probably the main message I would like you to take away if possible is Lean Startup phrases this as any kinds of ideas for a product, whether they're your own ideas or someone else on your team. Think of them as untested hypotheses. And that hypothesis is getting at some kind of behavior you're expecting your customer to make. And can you test that assumption cheaply? Can you do something that validates that? Therefore, you're reducing the risk of wasting effort. Optimize for iteration speed and recovery. Try to keep your development environment automated. There's a lot of tips here. I didn't go into this a lot, but you can find a lot of good talks on sticking with conventions as much as possible and making it easy for new members to be added to your team and produce things quickly. Test small ideas with big potential. A/B testing is really both for optimization work and product development work. We have examples where we do that. And finally, make customer validation your primary goal. I think as an engineer for 5 or 6 years, I used to think about me being valuable as shipping a lot of features and shipping products, and now I think more in terms of what can we ship that our customers really use so that it's successful both for me as someone that's shipping things, but also successful for the business. So LivingSocial is hiring. We're mostly Ruby, as I mentioned. We have Java and Scala iOS work. We hire remote developers. We have offices all around the country, or in the United States and in other countries as well. If you'd like to get in touch with me, here's some of my Twitter information and emails. Thanks a lot. And if you have any questions, I'm available after in inglés o español. Está bien. Gracias.
Tenemos tiempo para 2 preguntas más y después vamos a hacer un break de 15 minutos. ¿Preguntas?
Hi, so in the context of a new project, like a new startup, how do you validate new features or things that you want to take out when your user base is really small or almost non-existent for you to do like a significant statistically analysis stuff?
Yeah, statistical significance takes a lot of traffic. And we found sometimes we have done tests, even with hundreds of thousands of participants, that don't reach statistically significant differences. So I think initially what Lean Startup talks about is potentially just using more qualitative metrics. Maybe you could do a customer survey, and you could bring in some potential customers and maybe list some things, maybe show some mock-ups of some ideas you're thinking about doing, and try to gauge some interest just qualitatively. You know, where you say, you take back to your team, well, we brought in 5 people that we interviewed, and 2 of them really seemed interested in this feature. It's not a statistically significant result, but initially, until you have large numbers, I don't know if it's possible to get a true test.
So what you're saying is that at the beginning you're not able to do these really small tweaks, like checking like contrast and see what that does. It's like you gotta have millions of users like to be able to do those small tweaks.
I've only done A/B testing where we already had hundreds of thousands of visitors each day, so we could do this. In my personal projects, what I would do is probably do like I probably wouldn't try to do that initially, like a A/B test with vanity. I would probably do like a beta list and discussion board and try to do interviews with customers and that sort of thing. That's what I would suggest.
Hey.
Hi.
Hi, Andy. So you mentioned on your talk that one of the things that you assume is that people would give feedback. So I wonder if, in your experience, you find out that people is more keen to give positive feedback than negative feedback, or vice versa, and if so, if that changed your target metrics, like targeting higher because you assume that there is some hidden negative feedback is not showing up, or the other way around?
We tried to launch the feedback tool without any kind of moderation or anything. So really we wanted it to be, we made the deliberate decision with our feedback tool for it to be private to the merchants. It's not public, like TripAdvisor for travel is a public review, for example, but ours is just private to the merchant. I think your question was more about whether or not we would make additional decisions beyond the first iteration of this, maybe based on the kinds of feedback we were getting. To be honest with you, I think we didn't, had we done maybe more of that style of validating, just maybe focusing just on the consumer feedback portion at first, we would have maybe been able to do a couple of more iterations on that. Maybe we would have seen, maybe we would have been asking the wrong questions, or maybe we would have come up with other feature ideas. But in reality, what I wanted to show with that example was we really spent all of the kind of budget for that product feature, maybe it was 6 weeks or something, building the consumer and the merchant side. Maybe a better way to do it in retrospect would have been to focus more on the consumer piece and really establish that we were getting the right feedback for the merchants and that kind of thing. Is that helpful? Okay.
Okay, thank you, Andy.
Okay, thank you.